In the world of innovation, technical expertise is no longer sufficient. Whether you're a young professional or an experienced leader, navigating the intricate social dynamics in the workplace is crucial for driving change. In this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast, I talk with Crystal Kadakia, author of the best-selling book, Social Equations, a groundbreaking guide that addresses the unique challenges faced by individuals in STEM fields. Throughout the episode, she provides valuable insights and draws on concepts from various disciplines, such as business, organizational development, and socio-psychology, as she bridges the gap between technical prowess and effective collaboration. So get ready as we unravel the wisdom in her great book and discover how it empowers STEM professionals and social innovators to become collaborative leaders. Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. Thanks for joining me today, Crystal.
Yeah. Hi, Charles. So glad to be here.
Love to start each episode with just learning more about you and your background and really what got you interested in this space.
Yeah. So I have a really very cross sectional background across a lot of different things. I grew up in Austin, Texas. I started out in chemical engineering, got my bachelor's, worked for a Fortune 500 company for 5 years. But I very quickly moved from engineering after about 3 years to being a training manager. And that ended up leading to me becoming an external consultant and working more in organizational change, keynote speaking, writing all those books. And it's been pretty interesting to have that type of career journey that's very multifaceted. And today I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. So went from Texas to Ohio for a little bit and then ended up back in the South.
Well, I know there's no shortage of academic rigor in the technical preparation for STEM students. Unfortunately, while these technical skills are really taught in the best colleges worldwide, a lot of the STEM professionals are left to figure out the non-technical skills on their own through on-the-job experiences or through feedback that they get, which is really not very valuable or helpful to them. Is that what you found from your work as well?
Yeah, 100%. So when I started working, it was very evident to me that if the team wasn't working well, we weren't able to solve the problem on the manufacturing line. And that was exactly the moment where I realized, you know what? I think I found a problem that's even more interesting to me than chemical engineering and engineering the line. I started thinking, wow, these people problems are so complex and so fascinating, and I see people stumble with this all the time. And in my case, because like I said, I grew up in Texas, you can probably, if you're watching this, you can tell that I'm Indian. Okay. So I'm Indian. My parents are immigrants. I had had this lifetime of bridging differences and bridging gaps. Like in Texas, they eat brisket all the time, and my parents were vegetarian. So, I think like many of us in the technical field, we have sometimes this different background, but we don't have that practice in social dynamics. And so I kept seeing that as a problem for my peers from the beginning. I mean, I was 20 when I entered the workforce. And from the beginning, older managers and leaders would come to me and say, please translate what's going on in this situation because I'm not doing something right. They're not doing something right. We're not able to meet in the middle. And so I think it's something I saw a lot that people were technically very smart, very capable. And they put a lot of emphasis on that technical skill, but socially, they weren't able to get their point across. And that hurts. When you're really smart, you're really capable, but people just don't understand what you're saying and why it's important. And then it ends up going nowhere. You go home frustrated. And I kept seeing that over and over and over again. So I didn't know that, 12 years later, I'd be writing a book on this, or maybe now it's been 15 years, but I didn't know it at the time. But my education on this of how technical professionals don't have these skills and haven't been taught that happened very early on.
It's great to hear. And I've seen it that a lot of technical people without a formal leadership title and with underdeveloped technical or non technical skills, rather, they're still viewed as leaders. and they're put in these challenging situations that arise because they're the go-to problem solvers. I like in the book how you kind of compare their responsibilities, how they grow, to that of the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah, and that's so cool because when you start getting into social dynamics, you really realize that what's happening internally for you is happening internally for everyone around you. And so, whatever you end up learning in terms of self-awareness for your internal world, it actually serves you when you're interacting with someone one on one. It serves you when you're interacting as a team. And then it serves you as you're leading teams, whether informally or formally with that title. And then even as you're leading those departments of departments. So for folks who pick up social equations, what they'll see is that the table of contents are actually organized in this, as you call it, the Fibonacci sequence. It's a layering effect of, hey, things kind of get more and more interwoven, but it's the same stuff that you see within yourself that you see when you're even leading departments or even, parts of the whole company. And so that's definitely really fascinating to know that, hey, once I pick up the fundamentals, I can just start to apply this in more and more complex ways, which for a lot of us technical professionals, that's kind of an old hat. That's something you think about a lot in your technical work, but you don't necessarily think of your social work, your relational work, that part of your job that's so essential in the same way.
If you could also remind our listeners what the Fibonacci sequence is for those that may be unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, so you've got the 1 and then the 1 plus 1 equals 2, so it's that pyramid, and then as you go down, you start doing the 1 plus 2 plus 1, and that ends up giving you your next row. So if you ever look up the Fibonacci sequence on whatever search engine you use, you'll see this nice little pyramid with the additions coming out.
It gets more and more complex over time, just as a STEM professional's career does, assuming more responsibilities. I think everyone has an opinion on this, but why do you think technical professionals really struggle with social dynamics so much?
Yeah, so think about it from just even a neuroscience perspective. If you've spent 18 years of your education, say, focused on science or math. I don't know when some of you decided that that was your passion or, the area you wanted to focus on, but you probably have lots of years of learning those technical skills. And so again, if you think from a neuroscience perspective, that's the side of your brain and those are the pathways you've continually reinforced. Now, I know when I went to engineering school, I didn't have a class on psychology unless I opted for it as an elective. So, those same formal learning about social sciences wasn't really taught to me unless I opted to go for it. And then, secondly, you then didn't have a chance to practice any of the insights that have been out there. Like if you were a business major, you would learn about this in school. It just happens. It's a part you learn about consumer behavior. And then it turns out, wow, consumer behavior is kind of like studying my own purchasing habits. And well, why do I make decisions? Right. It all just starts to connect. We don't have that in our technical professions. If you major in math and accounting, you kind of get maybe a tiny bit, but not so much. As a medical professional, think about how many years of formal education medical professionals go to. And what we hear coming out of that is, wow, these surgeons, they need to work on their bedside manner. I mean, what a harsh critic, really, if you think about it. It's like, well, I just got out of, years of residency, finally graduating, and working in the real world at 33. And now you're like, oh, there's still some skills you kind of aren't so good at. And that's why more and more medical trainings, including, right, things like bedside manner as a part of the learning because we're just not teaching that alongside. And where it really hurts technical professionals is in the engineering or in the innovation sector because you're getting so good at, say, coding. And again, your ideas might just stay within you and within your sphere because you just can't influence others. It's not just about communication, it's about navigating dynamics. And that's a little bit different. We always think it's poor communication. That's just like one little piece of an entire field of dynamics that exists out there.
So part of it's just intrinsic in the field they're going into. Part of it's the way education is structured and just not having enough training in these areas that would build up their social dynamic muscle. What do you say to those that say that a lot of these STEM professionals are introverts and they just prefer to work alone? They don't like the social part of their jobs. They want to be technically proficient and be left alone to do their job. But when they have to reach out to others in a team or lead people, they kind of shy away from that.
I would say that that's a cop out. That's a great excuse to not do the work to help people have their contributions acknowledged. To be honest, I'm an ambivert, so I spend half of my time really wanting to be on my own, and the other half, I want to get my voice out there. But it's draining for me to be around people. That doesn't mean that I have any excuse to not learn social dynamics and what it means for me to get my voice out there. Being human is being social. We all have to sort of figure that out. And I don't know a single person who doesn't want their work acknowledged in some kind of way. So, this idea that, hey, I just want to be left in a corner to do my work. Yeah, but I bet you still want to be noticed for your work. And there's no way for you to be noticed for your work unless you can, in some way, spread it to other people. So, if you're saying you want to be in a corner, but you want your work to be noticed, well, those two fundamentally misalign. And, I just want to share that, from a personal standpoint, for me, a lot of this book, as I was writing it, it really reminded me of my dad. And he was from India, and he had, as long as I keep my head down and I technically am very good at my job, I will get rewarded mentality. And that just doesn't fly in our workplace culture. And it took him a long time to realize that he has to work through others to get his innovations and his ideas out there. I think a lot about this book and how much it can help people who think they need to be trapped in the corner because they just don't know how, really. And it's like, well, here's how. You just haven't had the opportunity to have someone boil it down for you and, you know, do this as fast as possible because, hey, those years are gone in college. You can't go back to that and learn formally back then. You're where you're at in your career now. How can you get this, understanding now? And so that's sort of when I think about this book and how it can help people really break through some of those barriers. It really can help with that.
And that's what I love about the book, providing all these tools. And you're so on point here regarding the fact that they don't want to interact with others. They want to be in their space, but they want their work recognized. And there's no other way to get your work recognized except to build out those social muscles so that you can and spread that to the world for them to see the mentality like you were saying of your dad, where I'm just going to put my nose to the grindstone. I'm not going to focus on anything else but doing great quality work and expect it to get recognized. Those days are over. And I think those people that still have that mentality, it's a losing proposition. So embracing this type of mentality where you need to build your social muscle, your social skills, your non-technical skills, because everyone wants their work recognized. And this is the most surest form of doing that. So paint us a picture of what's kind of inside the book, the topics you covered, and maybe we'll talk about one of the tools. So we've already kind of laid that foundation, but just kind of give us more insight into how this book is structured and some of the tools.
So we had talked about how the book is structured, kind of like the Fibonacci sequence. We have that table of contents that starts with yourself and it works all the way up to teams of teams. But inside each of those chapters, the what we have is a list of topics. And it's the most essential topics from the fields of psychology, social psychology, neuroscience related to those pieces. And in each of those topics, we'll talk about the problem. So, how it manifests in the workplace, like things you might notice that you're not so good at, or you're not getting the reaction you expected. We'll talk about a particular concept from those fields of study that can help. And then we actually talk about it from a STEM metaphor standpoint. So we translate that into a way that you might connect the dots back to the technical skills you have and know. And then we actually paint a picture with a story. So we took one of the great things between me and my co author is that we both have real life work experience. So we've experienced these situations ourselves, and we also interviewed STEM professionals and really got their stories of real life experiences in these areas. And then we break it down to kind of a step by step. How do you do this? And then we have reflection questions. And all of that is in a, maybe like 7 pages, 7 to 10 pages. So this is really intended to be like a reference guide. You feel like you've got a problem that came up in the moment. Let me skim through the table of contents. Okay, it's this one. Let me flip to that and see what could help me. You can read it start to finish, of course, as well. And that's, I think, what is so awesome about the way this book is structured is it's geared for that first time, okay, I want to download of all of this, but it's also built for that ongoing, okay, in the moment of application, what happened? How can I grow in this moment? And so I really hope to see this on people's desks, their bedside table, right? In that moment where people are like, you really should meditate. And you're like, what's meditation got to do with this? Okay, that's a little trigger for me. Maybe there's a social dynamic thing here that I need to either build my self awareness, understand a relationship better, those sorts of triggers that might make you think, let me dive into this a little bit more.
No, that's a great structure for the book. I love how it's structured, like you mentioned. A lot of books give you a lot of great content, but they don't really give you stories to illustrate these concepts. And specifically, since this is designed for a STEM audience, it gives that STEM metaphor, which connects it in even a deeper way to those in this field, which is designed to do. So the other part that I really notice is that you're pulling tools, the best tools in development from thought leaders that will help them in their roles. So it's not just relying on your experience, your knowledge. You've kind of broadened the perspective and saying, okay, Stephen Covey, whoever comes into play in these moments can really have an impact if they have a great tool that you want to showcase and you think it's going to benefit your intended audience. One that I really like that's pretty prevalent in the literature, but pausing when triggered, because even though you said it's a reference guide, you can pick it up, you can start at any chapter. In some cases, if you're starting out, the first principle is focus on you before you can focus on relationships and teams. And so I think there's that logical progression that if for a those coming new into the field that may not be leaders, it's great to start with that so you can have more emotional regulation and pausing when you're triggered and having that, you talk about the ladder of inference, which there's a lot of research on, and just trying to stop yourself before you're making these assumptions that are not going to serve you later on and are going to hurt your decision making capabilities.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because you're spot on. I said it earlier that N equals one chapter, the one that's really on yourself, it is that fundamental building block. So it is great to really have that down, whether you're new in your career or perhaps even older, but just again have maybe never really addressed this part of your skill set. And there's a lot of times you'll get feedback over and over again, and you start to wonder, is it really their problem or is it me? If you get into that point, again, that's where these dynamics, it's there's something in your understanding and your perspective that you might want to shift. So this topic around pausing while triggered is such a good one because it comes up all the time. Even if at work, we don't like to think of ourselves as triggered. Again, especially if you're a STEM professional, you probably pride yourselves on remaining pretty objective. It's that moment where you're really afraid of coming off wrong or coming off like you're not as good, and so you jump in and you start to try to prove yourself. That's just one example of how this might manifest because it's actually a moment you're getting triggered. You're feeling a little insecure and you might jump on something someone else said and say, oh, well, that's not right. That's wrong. Let me tell you why. Here's my chain of evidence to prove my logic. Well, the ladder of inference, which is a concept we introduce in this chapter, it helps you understand that you start in a conversation with a pool of data, and you have your pool of data that you're taking in from the conversation. And as you take in that pool of data, you immediately, and this happens very fast in your mind in sometimes seconds, you immediately layer on assumptions. And those assumptions are based on your beliefs. And those beliefs end up leading you to make a conclusion about what the other person is saying. And you jump up this ladder very quickly in a matter of seconds, and then you react and you respond. Keeping the concept of a ladder of inference in mind, it helps you realize that the pool of data you're drawing these conclusions on might not be accurate. They might have some pieces that you're missing or misunderstanding. It keeps you open to pausing and really evaluating what is the pool of data I'm working from. Is it data that I tend to notice in a situation, right? That's where sometimes biases come in. I might have a biased set of data here. And it just keeps you asking that question, do I have all the data before reacting to a moment? And so there might be many times where, maybe it's like I was saying earlier, it could be insecurity, but it could be something else very, that has nothing to do with your internal feelings, but more about you think you've got the right set of facts and they don't. Or someone in a meeting has an idea that counters your idea. Those are moments where, as STEM professionals, we tend to be triggered and want to prove our point. And in fact, here's the reason why this matters. When you step off with wanting to prove your point, what do you do to the relationship? Sometimes it's not really good for the team for you to sit there and prove your point. Maybe you take up way more airtime than necessary. Maybe you come off as aggressive or passive aggressive rather than assertive. It takes you into yourself and what you want rather than what the team needs. And it takes away from your team outcome. And, as we talked about earlier, you can't work in a cubbyhole by yourself. You need these people in order to be able to influence and get your piece of the puzzle out there. I heard this great quote when I first started my career. If you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. That's one that came into mind over and over again as writing this book.
Well, I think also that STEM professionals need to balance that problem solving perspective, right? Of making their case with just curiosity, have more appreciative inquiry, stay curious longer, ask those questions, and you come across as less defensive, more open to understanding other perspectives. And that perspective taking is really critical in getting stuff moved forward, right? Being more influential in your role, regardless of what that role may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And appreciative inquiry is something I had never heard of until I got my master's in organizational development. And it was a beautiful concept because it really took my inner problem solving desire and continued to keep it as a solution oriented, but what people would call positive. And but it goes beyond being just positive. It's so appreciative inquiry when you break down that word, and there's a topic about this in the book. Inquiry is about asking questions. So, Charles, you were just saying being curious, but appreciative, it's thinking about very specific kind of questions when you're in a problem situation where it's thinking that will appreciate on itself. So, just if you think about like an investment and you want it to appreciate, it's that sort of inquiry. And so, in appreciative inquiry, you're specifically looking for what's exceptional in a situation and you're thinking, how could I make the exceptional the everyday norm? And so say, in my case, when I worked for Procter and Gamble, I was working on the Swiffer mop and we have these tubs that the pads come in and these tubs would leak. Regular problem solving asks you to figure out kind of your whys. Why is this leaking? This is such a problem. Let's study all of the broken tubs, create a really long Excel sheet, which we did, of all the possible causes for these, leaking tubs and test every single one of those out. Well, appreciative inquiry says, which of these tubs is not leaking? So, what the exceptional tub and what could it have been about that exceptional tub that made it not leak? And you then try to appreciate, how do we make that the norm? What do we do in our process to make that the norm? I'm using a manufacturing example, but appreciative inquiry, where it can really help tech professionals, is when you're in meetings with other functions. Because other functions like marketing or comms, they might always see you as the roadblock, the one who's raising your hand saying, I think there's a problem, or we're not quite ready yet. the one throwing up the barriers, the critical one. I see what's wrong with this. Well, it's really great if you can bring that mentality and if you can be the one asking those questions. Well, what's working here? If something's about to be delayed in terms of a product launch, what parts of this aren't going to be delayed? And why is that working so well? How can we then learn from that and bring it to the parts of this project that aren't going so well instead of being like, no, I'm sorry, we can't do it? That's how appreciative inquiry starts really helping STEM professionals, again, build better relationships. And you can see this is way deeper than just communication skills. This is understanding the way people think and work, the dynamics at play underneath.
Well, it's also about exposing the individual to maybe heuristics, biases that they may have as well by these two great tools that we just mentioned, so that they're serve more rational decision making, make better decisions, because that's really one of the hallmarks of great leaders is they make great decisions and understanding kind of those mental shortcuts that you're likely to take if you default to certain thought patterns or you're not really taking different perspectives of other individuals. So having that appreciative inquiry, looking at the ladder of inference and stopping yourself, pausing to reflect before you go up that ladder too far are great tools to help everyone, especially STEM professionals, really become better leaders, better managers, and get their work recognized.
Yeah, 100%. And, we're just talking about two of the tools, right? Is imagine if you had this sort of thing unpacked for each of these things around, it's I think we have about 5 topics under self-awareness. If you had 5 of the biggest tools to help you with self-awareness, 5 of the biggest tools with one-on-one relationships, right? Those are the kinds of things I think that really empower people. And I go back to, I was really shocked when my dad read this entire book and he told me, he was like, I wish I'd had this 40 years ago. And that really touched me because, as I was writing the book, I was really thinking about him. And then it actually had the impact I wanted on him. So that was so great. And then hearing from other readers, and this has been so fascinating to me that I've had a 90-year-old read it, and he was a doctor his whole life and he's retired now, but he was pulling out story after story of a situation that exactly demonstrated at ladder of inference, for example, that came up. And it's just it touched someone at that age level to someone who was in college who was studying music. At first they were like, this was way over my head, but then I gave them a music metaphor for one of the topics, and that really helped. As a STEM professional, being able to have a language around social dynamics that you can then share with all ages, all different functions, and you're all kind of working from the same playbook. I think about how valuable that would have been for, a lot of the people I ran into when I was first working as well.
When you shared some of those stories, but are there any other memorable stories or feedback from readers that really have stuck with you and reinforced the significance of this piece of work?
When I was working, there was a clear moment where a manager 2 levels above me had asked me to translate something one of my peers, an idea my peer had for fixing a problem on the manufacturing line. And I remember explaining it to him, to the level up manager, and he was like, "Why didn't your peer just say it like that?" I would have completely signed off on the idea. Why can't he just talk the way you do? Like, why can't he just explain things in that way? And, it was very basic things. Like, for me, it felt basic. But I was thinking about the business context, right? And I was starting with the business context, not my technical expertise first. And I was taking the idea this brilliant peer of mine had and really shaping it to the business context and the fact that I'm talking to a manager 2 levels above me, what he would need to know rather than all of the technical data sheet and whatnot. So I think about that story, and this is obviously something I've actually connected back with my peer on. And it's interesting to hear how when you have completely different building blocks, how it changes your structure for how you put yourself out there in the world, right? How you're spreading things, which yes is communication, but It's not the words on the page, it's that fundamental structure behind it. So that was really memorable to me, and I've thought many times as I read this book, well, why can't, he communicate the way you do? Why couldn't he have explained it that way? And I think to myself, well, now he can. I think to myself, well, why can't STEM professionals communicate this way? They certainly can. They're certainly smart enough. And that's something I think really feedback from this book just, I think a lot of people have this stereotype about STEM professionals that they just are the way they are, and they're just dinged for not having these, magic social dynamic capabilities. And it's like, well, that's a skill just like anything else. It's got to be trained, it's got to be practiced. You've got to have some awareness around it. You have to have some focus around it. These folks aren't idiots, okay? Like, that's that when we talk about them that way sometimes, and it's just not true. So I think that's been some of the best feedback I've gotten is just to hear how much it gives a voice to the struggles technical professionals have, and that hey, it's not rocket science. It can be broken down and learned and used in a way that helps advance people's careers.
You're right, and dispelling that myth that either you're a social person or you're not, and if you go into the STEM professions, you're probably not social and you can't improve those skills. Completely not true. This book provides a very practical guidebook framework that speaks in the language that helps them connect the dots with great tools that they can use right away. In the book, are there any Easter eggs or hidden references in the book that readers should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, there's one really tiny one. I don't and if anyone finds it, I would love for you to email it because it's so small. But there is a image where we write the word kintsugi. And kintsugi is actually a Japanese word and a Japanese notion. And I might be butchering the translation, but it's the concept of they call it golden repair. And the idea is that if you have a piece of pottery, and actually this isn't the idea, this is actually a craft in Japanese custom. If you have broken pottery and you put it back together in a way that's more beautiful than before. So they actually use gold mortar, gold paste, right, to bring together these shards of pottery, and then you reuse the cup. It's the idea of golden repair. So this is a little Easter egg in there because the thought is that you can have problems, but that doesn't mean that when you bring them back together, they can't be even better than they were before. So it sounds a little bit like the, appreciative inquiry we're talking about, but that notion, it goes for a problem you're facing at work that's external to you, but also for yourself. You might have gone through a lot, and even you can be better than you were ever, before. It's a really amazing Easter egg to have hidden in the book.
Good. I'll look forward to looking for that when I peruse it again. Now, you talk about technical professionals having the ability to spread their innovations. What impact and innovations do you hope to make with social equations, and really, what is the hope for readers of this work?
For me, this book fills a really critical gap. So, I didn't talk a lot about my co author, but Jeanette Williams, she's a professor at UCSD, and we actually found each other on LinkedIn, and we never met in person to write this book. We met online over COVID. We wrote the book virtually over 2 years. And she was teaching organizational change in the engineering program at UCSD. My world, I was an engineer. I got a master's in OD and I was doing OD consulting. So we saw this gap that, hey, everyone is dinging these folks for not having these skills, and there's nothing there to fill the gap. So I think first and foremost, the innovation we want to bring is that this is something taught in colleges. This is something that people would consider in their new hire onboarding, leadership development programs, because it's filling that crucial gap. So that's what I hope really spreads for folks across the industry. And I think for readers, what I really hope is that y'all all become more well-rounded in your capability set and more fulfilled because of that well-roundedness. I think that it's really great to have this technical expertise, but it can be fatiguing sometimes to always have that and have that pressure of performing. And I think without having a lot of knowledge of social dynamics and taking the time to really think about yourself and what's going on for you internally, and doing that intentionally, just as you would if there was a problem with a patient or a problem on a spreadsheet or a problem with analytics, you would intentionally unpack that problem. I think when you do that with yourself, there's this sense of calm and fulfillment and just a break from the technical problems and the technical pressure you feel. And so I'm really hoping for readers to feel that uplift.
Well said, and I think they will upon reading this book. It's a great book, lots of tools. It's constructed in a way that's going to have immediate application and use to those that are reading it. Designed for STEM professionals, but I would argue any leader could really benefit from some of these tools, especially when they're communicating with STEM professionals within their organization, within their team. So this is really beneficial for them too. What would you recommend to listeners that are starting to read this book or really starting in their profession as a STEM professional?
Yeah, if I could turn back the clock, I think having that first section on yourself and then the second section on the one-on-one relationships with others, those 2 sections really focusing on that, I think is just such a home run because you don't wanna feel overwhelmed. You're already overwhelmed when you're transitioning to work. What you want are some things that really practically can help you in the moment, and after you figured out that one-on-one relationship really taps into your relationship with your manager, which is essential when you first start your career. And especially now when a lot of work is remote, you really have to understand those dynamics in a new way. And especially if you've grown up mostly like on your phone and things like that, some of these are going to feel a little bit scary to really venture. And I think focusing on those first 2 sections can really help take away some of the fear, especially realizing that everyone is feeling those same sort of things. Everyone's navigating these same sort of feelings internally and then also in conversation. And I think the more we reduce our anxiety when we're starting our career, the more successful we are. I remember this hiring manager from a Silicon Valley company. She came up to me and she was like, a lot of these new hires, I don't know what to do. They're coming up to me at 6 months and they're expecting me to give them a promotion in another 6 months. I just don't know how to coach them any better. And, they were leading these conversations, the new hires, based on, well, this is the norm. This is what I should be given. And it was from a complete lack of self awareness of how this might be received on the other end and the idea that a relationship has 2 parties in it. It's not just about you. There's a whole nother set of dynamics at play. So I think even in that very it's almost a trope now, that conversation coming up when we talk about Gen Zs and millennials, but it takes self-awareness to realize this isn't just about you and your career. You are a part of a larger fabric. What is it gonna take for you to be successful and for the company to be successful together? It's not just you alone in this, and everyone's going through it with you. So, I think those are some of the things that I would really focus on in that first year.
Love that. Thank you so much, Crystal, for joining me today. Remind our listeners how they can learn more about your work and where they can get the book.
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon, very easy to find. And then if you head to my website, crystalkadakia.com, that's a great way to learn about the myriad of things I'm up to. And folks are always welcome to email me and connect with me on LinkedIn. And there's only one Crystal Kadakia in the world. Luckily, I have a very unique name. So pretty easy to find. And I would love to hear from any of you.
If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share with others and post about it on social media. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which has video recordings of all the episodes of this podcast, along with bite-sized segments called single servings that are designed to answer your most pressing leadership and management questions. Remember, until next time, it's not what you know that counts, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.